Welcome to Eye on the Cure, a podcast from the Foundation Fighting Blindness, providing science research, news, and insights about the world of vision and blinding diseases.
Happy Wednesday, Vision Voyeurs, and welcome to Eye on the Cure. I'm your host, Maddie Mossman, with the Foundation Fighting Blindness. This is our second episode of the year where I learn alongside you. Whether you're a researcher, clinician, someone living with vision loss, or totally new to the Foundation, this podcast is for you. We'll be breaking down the latest vision research, news, inspirational personal stories, and bring you conversations with the people working to move us closer to treatments and one day, cures for blinding diseases. Now, let's get our eye on the cure with this week's episode featuring Dr. Alicia Kemble. Alicia Kemble is a senior venture associate at Retinal Degeneration Fund for the wholly owned venture arm of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, where she leads diligence and sourcing of new investment opportunities and strategic competitive analysis across the therapeutic landscape for IRDs and dry age-related macular degeneration. Alicia is a neuroscientist by training and earned her PhD in Switzerland. Prior to joining the fund, she focused on small molecules and biologics drug development at Roche for almost 5 years. I am so excited to have Alicia on today to get into the specifics of venture philanthropy and why it matters to you and our mission. Alicia, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Maddie. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. So we just heard a little bit about your incredible background, but I'd love to take it back to the beginning. Can you walk us through your journey and how you ultimately found yourself in your role today?
Sure. So I've always been in the research space my entire career. I started out at the bench like many scientists do, and I was always interested in really understanding disease mechanisms, how they work, why they happen. And I studied those in many cellular models, so in vitro models, and then in animal models. And I did that for about 10 years. And then I became really interested in the translational aspect. What happens to all the information that we accumulate and acquire and publish in academia? How does this help us develop drugs and therapies that get to patients? What's involved? Who's involved? What are the steps and the regulatory aspects that we need to understand? And that really brought me into the pharmaceutical space, which was a really eye-opening experience to be able to understand what really goes into every aspect of drug development. And so eventually I decided that instead of working on one specific disease and one drug, I really wanted to zoom out and understand what the landscape looks like, who's developing these drugs outside of pharma, what happens in the biotech space, what's needed, what does this ecosystem look like? And so that brought me into the venture space where I am now at the RD Fund.
That is amazing, an incredible background. Can you share what you do exactly at the RD Fund?
Sure. So I'm responsible mainly for incoming investment opportunities. And what that means is that I look for companies that are developing therapeutics in our space. So that's for inherited retinal diseases or dry age-related macular degeneration, or the advanced form called geographic atrophy. And my job is to really lead a team of scientists and make sure that this is a suitable investment for our fund. So we dig into the development aspect, the scientific background, and make sure that the appropriate animal models are used, that the appropriate studies are done for drug development. If it's a clinically staged company, we pull in our clinical experts to make sure that these programs and results are really in line with our investment thesis.
So wide range of things that you do. All very important.
I get to work with a lot of incredible people, so
that's
very
amazing.
rewarding.
And can you back up and tell us exactly what is venture philanthropy?
Sure. So Venture philanthropy is very similar to traditional venture investing, but more with a mission focused lens. So, in traditional venture investment, you would typically have an investment fund where you would deploy capital into specific companies in your portfolio. And then those exits on successful returns would go back to your limited partners or LPs. And this could be high net worth individuals, pension funds, et cetera, to kind of pay them back for their initial investment into your fund. And then the other proceeds would be used to potentially start a new fund or maybe even start a new company.
Wow, it is so incredible. Why do we exactly need it, especially at FFB?
So, venture philanthropy is really able to take on risk areas that many institutional investors are just uncomfortable with. So, most of the risk, especially in the rare disease space, which all IRDs are part of, really have a lot of front loaded risk. And so all biotech programs have mainly front loaded risk. And this just means that as you progress through specific milestones like preclinical proof of concept, so you show maybe in an animal model that the drug that you're working on does have a therapeutic effect, and then go into maybe manufacturing, so you're able to make the drug that you'd like to make in the way that you'd like to make it, and then eventually get to the clinic. Once you kind of pass through all these binary milestones, you essentially the risk starts to recede. And this is where more institutional or larger investors feel slightly more comfortable becoming involved in co-investing with the RD fund. But venture philanthropy funds are able to come into this high risk space and deploy capital to support these programs and kind of help slightly de-risk them in order to bring in more capital.
Okay. And when you bring up risk, can you talk a little bit about that and share what that high risk means and what it looks like?
Yeah, so this is kind of an uncomfortable statistic, but 90% of the results that come out of academia and 90% of actually programs across the biotech space fail. And there's so many reasons for that. It could be due to an animal model that maybe wasn't as faithful as we thought. It could be due to a differing in disease mechanisms in our models. It could be due to lack of efficient manufacturing, execution. There's so many stepping stones on the way to drug development, especially for these rare diseases where sometimes we don't understand the mechanism or we don't have a good model, which is the case for so many diseases across the board. So that's where a lot of risk comes from, but it's really compounded in rare disease by the financing risk. So, do you have the money to get to your critical inflection points?
Right. With that statistic in mind, what keeps everyone going? Where's the hope that you hold on to with knowing that?
So, we've actually been really fortunate in our field to have an FDA approved gene therapy. So, essentially a critical win. And that was with Luxturna in 2017 for RP65 or LCA2. So, it really just helped define the path to the market and helped others really gain traction and follow on and stand on the shoulder of giants who really trod that path in the beginning. Many rare disease communities don't have that. And so even though it seems like 1 out of 400 diseases that have made it, it's we've still got a clear path forward, which is great.
Yeah, it's reignited that fire to show what can come out of it. I love
Yeah,
that story.
so many more that have really built on that momentum, even though it feels like it was quite a while ago now. there have there's been an explosion of the number of preclinical assets targeting IRDs and dry AMD, as well as clinical assets. And there's so many more at pivotal stages, so close to the market than there have ever been.
Are you able to share a little bit about those that are coming out and all the different stages that have happened since Luxturna?
Sure. So I can just start with our portfolio. And one of our favorite stories is with Athena Therapeutics. They have two pivotal trials. One is for LCA1, which is an ultra-rare disease targeting mutations in a gene called Gucci2D. And they also have a program for X-linked retinoschisis, or XLRS, that's also recently entered pivotal trials. So we hope to have what's called a BLA, or essentially approval entry into the market pending positive pivotal results. So those are two at the top of our list. We also have a pivotal XLRP trial from Beacon Therapeutics and an LCA5 trial at Opus Genetics.
Oh, that is so exciting. That is wonderful to hear. I would love to tap into, since I am speaking to a scientist, what that feels like on the scientist perspective. As we know, this is amazing for patients and clinicians, but what is this like for the dreams of people who are making this outcome a reality?
So there's so many people that are involved in that very early discovery work all the way to the commercial stage. And for scientists at the very beginning, it must feel so immensely gratifying to know that your life's work and everything that you've done to identify a target, help understand the disease, maybe even develop some of the first targeting strategies for this disease are handed off to these companies that can go on and help develop these diseases. And many of these scientists actually remain involved, maybe as advisors, or sometimes they join these companies full time to really help realize all of the efforts and bring them to patients.
Oh, that's so amazing. How much does it actually cost to get a new treatment out to patients? That's probably a really broad question for this.
A great question. But to your point, it's a very nuanced question.
Yeah.
And so it's highly dependent on multiple factors, but it's typically in the range of hundreds of millions. So some of the factors that can influence this are, for example, the modality. Gene or genetic therapies are exponentially more expensive to develop than small molecules, which could be something like an oral tablet. The patient size and population greatly influences the clinical trial design. So that could look like, for an ultra rare IRD, clinical trial of 20 people versus maybe a larger trial for dry age-related macular degeneration, which could encompass over 300 people. So it's really dependent on so many factors. And so it's really, we just have to pivot and adapt to every single scenario.
That makes sense. Who is actually paying for it?
A lot of people.
I'm sure.
These are very capital intensive endeavors. So drug development is a very long, risky road. And so one of the great things about the foundation is that in order to support some of these really critical early discovery stage experiments and some of these work and academics, we have excellent granting programs that can really support specific experiments, maybe design of drugs, et cetera, before they are handed off to companies. And this is where more of the capital intensive work starts to happen. And this is where funds like venture philanthropy funds and what we call small seed funds, who are less risk averse but able to deploy small dollars into companies. And once we hit those risk milestones, then more and more larger syndicating members come in. So those are funds that can write larger and larger checks. But just so to say, a lot of people are involved with a lot of capital that exponentially increases as you get closer to the market.
So it's a ripple effect. After you have some traction and people, those other ones will come in and help out with bigger checks.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Could you talk about, you mentioned grants, and I would love to hear a little bit more about how that plays into this whole ecosystem and process.
Yeah. So the RD fund specifically can only invest in companies. So we can't provide any type of funding that's essentially not returnable. So grants are essentially capital from maybe the foundation or other institutes that are not necessarily meant to be paid back to the foundation. but the output is really the learnings from what the grant supported. So, sorry, the RD fund, on the other hand, when we invest, we have a mission-focused lens, but we also invest in the hope of capital returns. So we use equity-based vehicles and other financing instruments to really support these companies, but overall longer term, where we continue to support them, not just one experiment, but we help them continue to grow with the hope of a financial return on the back end.
I think that's a very important distinction, that it's operating as a separate vehicle than the foundation, but it's all geared towards that same mission. Would that be the right way? Okay. That makes a lot more sense. Hey, Vision Warriors. Before we get back to today's episode, here's something to keep your eye on. Save the date for our inaugural National Day of Vision Walk, happening virtually on Saturday, October 31st, 2026. This event is an interactive way to support the Foundation Fighting Blindness from anywhere. Stay tuned for more information coming soon, or email visionwalk@fightingblindness.org to be first to know when registration launches this month. How did the RD Fund actually come about?
So the RD Fund was incorporated in 2018 on the back of the success of Luxturna. And it was really to provide an avenue for so many incredible programs that had excellent preclinical proof of concept. They were largely de-risked to a certain stage, and they were just sitting on the shelf, for lack of a better term. And this is widely due to the fact that there was just not really a lot of institutional knowledge of what IRDs were, how they could be drugged, and what success might look like. And then when Luxturna came onto the scene, this really gained traction for broader investor interest. And the RD Fund was able to help invest and co-invest into several companies pursuing therapeutic strategies in our space. And that is actually the basis of our earlier portfolio.
Wow, that is amazing. And where does that initial investment come from?
So all of the capital that's invested by the RD Fund comes from philanthropic donations to the foundation. And so that capital we take and invest into our portfolio companies to help drive their therapeutic programs.
Okay, that makes sense. What happens when a treatment comes out of a company that the RD Fund has invested in? Where do those profits then go?
So if there's a successful exit, those profits are returned to the foundation to further the mission. And that could look like many things, resupporting the RD Fund, or maybe any other critical initiatives that require intensive capital.
Okay. That kind of plays into that ecosystem that you were talking about. I would love to expand on that and hear more of you breaking that down and what the ecosystem is.
So the foundation has really built an incredible ecosystem to support therapeutic development from start to finish. So through the granting programs led by our incredible science team, we've been able to support early in career scientists, clinicians, and other academics who have really dug deep into the discovery stage of all of these inherited retinal diseases, as well as deduced mechanisms for dry AMD. And so this critical juncture, after all of these discoveries are made, leads to the development of potential therapeutics. And so the baton is passed on from these early stage programs to the fund, where we can follow on all of their progress, but invest into those companies and follow them over longer periods of time to support them. So they've kind of created this stepping stone dynamic to support even early stage scientists and discoveries into therapies that can help patients at the end.
So with the RD Fund, it's creating more longevity within clinical trials and research for IRDs and AMDs. Is that a good way to put it?
Yeah, we provide longer term support for a really capital intensive process. So we don't just leave them after our first bolus of investment. We really try to support them through any mission related milestones that may be needed. And that could look like approval of the drug, clinical trial milestones prior to exit, or whatever is deemed necessary by the company or asset.
I'm sure that it has been absolutely crucial in expanding our mission.
It's been an incredible experience, and it's been great to hear all of the stories from our portfolio and our constituents. Really, 10, 15 years ago, they were hoping maybe for an animal model, and now they're reading about, preclinical development or clinical trials for their indication. So it's very rewarding, and it's great to know how much the RD fund has really accelerated development in this space.
Can you share some of those stories that are your favorite?
Sure. I always have to revert back to Etsena and Opus Genetics. Etsena has been a wonderful story. We've heard so many patient just stories who of some patients who have been treated in their clinical trials can now see snowflakes. They're able to recognize their parents for the first time. And these are children. So it's really heartbreaking and heartwarming to kind of experience this through the whole cycle of their journey with them. We've heard similar stories from the LC5 trial from Opus Genetics, and as well as from some of our other portfolio companies who have made it into the clinic. And so we hope to build on those stories and that momentum and bring more and more of those to life.
I love that. When you started your career earlier working on the bench and now you're on this side of it, how has your perspective of research and clinical trials and science changed after working at the RD Fund and seeing this momentum and hope that it has given?
Yeah, that's a really great question. It's really opened my eyes, for lack of a better phrase. I really wasn't able to appreciate the entirety of the process,
Mm.
as somebody in the very early stages of discovery, and just how much it takes, how much capital, the execution, regulatory strategy, all of the incredible people that go into getting one drug across the finish line. And just knowing that 90% of them fail all of the hard work that so many intelligent people do. It's hard to capture until you're able to take a step back and take, a 10,000-foot view of the entire process. So it's definitely made me more supportive of our founders and really try to bring all the resources of the foundation or any resources that we can to help any founders that are developing drugs in our space. So, and that could include our incredible scientific advisory board, our incredible science team. We've got an amazing set of people who are incredibly accomplished. We've got a great management team, a wonderful board full of investment experts, clinicians, regulatory experts. I mean, we've really have a special resource that I think is instrumental to helping us due diligence and just really propping up all of the work that goes into therapeutic development.
Hmm. I mean, it really does take a village, and I'm sure that it's heartwarming to hear for listeners that the people behind this mission care so deeply and truly work so hard to see it come to fruition. So I'm really happy that you said that.
Yeah, and thank you to our development team you included. It really does take all of us. This is just a small highlight of a much larger machine. So
That's very true. When we've talked about that statistic of 90%, we've mentioned it a few times. I would love to just tap into for listeners that even though something might fail, I would love to hear your perspective on the fact that you've learned so much from any kind of clinical trial and how that can move us forward, even if it isn't successful. And if you have some examples of that, that would be great.
Yeah, there's so many trials that could fail, and not because necessarily the drug didn't work, but it could be an endpoint. It could be due to lack of financing because the sponsor realized that it's no longer profitable for them to keep pursuing this trial. And there's so many learnings, like understanding maybe an AAV capsid that they thought worked preclinically is actually not appropriate, or maybe inflammatory in humans. And so these are really difficult learnings, but it helps you pivot and become more successful in the next round. A good example is probably J&J's XLRP trial, where there's several clinicians that really supported the efficacy of this trial for patients, but the regulatory endpoint was not statistically significant, and it was not approved by the regulators. And so this could really just be a misutilized endpoint, or maybe the wrong endpoint to read out what was actually maybe beneficial for patients.
And what are the opportunities where venture philanthropy was absolutely critical in getting treatments across that finish line for other diseases and especially IRDs?
So there's so many examples, which is really exciting over the past few years of not just venture philanthropy, but also nonprofits supporting drug development that led to FDA approved therapeutics. I think one of the best examples is probably from the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation's venture philanthropy arm, which helped finance Vertex's CFTR program and contributed to the approval of a drug called Kalydeco in 2012. So this model has been around and efficient and functional for quite a while and is proven out so many times. Other drugs like Viskira, that was supported by the Foundation Telethon, which is an Italian nonprofit, Vyjuvek and Zavaskin, which are therapeutics, now FDA-approved therapeutics for epidermolysis bullosa, which were supported by their research partnerships venture philanthropy arm, were also approved in 2023 and 2025. I could go on, but it's knowing how capital intensive the drug development process is and how much risk is involved. The fact that donor capital could get these to the finish line, especially in the rare disease space, is just adds to the incredible story and momentum that we all have.
It's really cool to hear even other missions and all the successes that have come out of venture philanthropy.
Absolutely. It's stunning what a group of incredibly determined people can do. Yeah, we just put our mind and resources to it.
It's very true. Finally, what would you like our listeners to take away from this episode, whether they are a patient, a family member to someone living with vision loss, or even a clinician?
I guess I would just say there's so much hope, and there's never been a better time or more reason to be hopeful than there is now. There's so much movement in the field. There's so much momentum, not only in the IRD space or in the dry AMD space, but across the rare disease space as well. And this has led to, other regulatory principles that have been put forward that also support our space and eventually, hopefully, faster drug development. And we really just need that one win. It's not the 10%, it's not even the 1%. It's the one win that's going to help drive all of us forward again. And we are so close. And so a rising tide lifts all ships, and we are getting there. So just keep hope, stay focused, and just make sure you support whoever in your ecosystem is in need, and just remind them that there's so many people here working to support them and get those therapies across the finish line.
It's a beautiful way to put it. Alicia, thank you so much for joining us today. I have learned so much from our conversation, and I know our listeners have as well. I am very grateful for your scientific expertise and your passion for advancing treatments that make a real difference for the blind and low vision community. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Maddie, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Eye on the Cure. We'll see you next time. In the meantime, check out our website, www.fightingblindness.org for the latest info on the research, treatments, events, and how to get in contact with a chapter in your community. Be sure to follow us on social media to stay informed on the latest news and activities from the Foundation.
This has been the Eye on the Cure podcast. To make an impact, donate now at fightingblindness.org.